I sold everything, every piece of paper that proved my worth, every stone in the foundation of the life I built. I didn't do it out of weakness, I did it out of a fierce protective love. I liquidated my entire share of the business, my beautiful home overlooking the Atlantic, the culmination of 4 decades of careful, ethical work, all to save my husband's life. When Sterling, the man I saved, the man I had anchored for 42 years, was finally, well, he didn't just leave me for someone younger. No, sir. He orchestrated a cruel, total way to get out of the marriage and keep the cash. He used my own act of sacrifice as the final knife, stealing the last bit of professional dignity I had left. My son, Garrett, my 2 closest partners, they all stood by, silent and cool about it, watching the execution of my ruin. I was Elara Vance, a woman known for her strategic foresight, now reduced to nothing. I was 65, and my entire world was a cold, cruel joke. This is the story of how I was forced to spend a terrifying night in the kind of storm that makes the ocean look calm, only to find a lost, shivering little girl named Clara. I used the last $20 bill I owned, my final tiny safety net, to buy her a blanket and a piece of dry food. That simple act, the ultimate gesture of a woman who had nothing left to lose, became the very thing that brought around the change. 3 days later, 17 massive black security vehicles converged on the desolate area where I'd sheltered. A man of untouchable power whose name moves markets stepped out. Seeing his daughter with me, he set in motion a sequence of events that didn't just rebuild my life, but restored the worth of everything I had sacrificed. If you are watching this, you know the truth. You can lose everything you own, but you never lose who you are. Follow my story to the end and share your city in the comments below. At 65 years old, I learned that the only asset you truly own is your uncompromised moral compass. The one thing nobody can take from you is your integrity. My world was built on bedrock, the granite coast of Coastal Haven, Maine. For over 3 decades, I was the strategic director of Vance & Stone Financial Group. We weren't Wall Street flash, we were old money stability. We managed fortunes that had been in New England for 200 years. Sterling, my husband, was the charmer, the face of the firm. But I was the engine, the one who structured the complex trusts, the one who could spot the weak spot in the money plan faster than anyone else in the business. Our life was cool. The big, paid-for colonial home built in 1910, looking right out over the rolling Atlantic. Every morning, I watched the fog roll off the water, convinced that I had built a fortress that nothing could breach. I had earned my security, dollar after ethical dollar. Our son Garrett was 40, a successful commodities broker down in Boston. He was steeped in the language of success. I thought our family was secure, solid as a rock. The Tuesday morning in late March that changed everything was quiet and sunny. I was finalizing a massive client foundation document. My focus was absolute. Then Dr. Ellis called. His voice was low, professional, and entirely devoid of hope. "Elara, you and Sterling need to come in immediately. It's the oncology results." "We can't discuss this over the phone." I didn't cry, I didn't break. I closed my laptop and walked out. This was the first of many forced exits I would have to make. I had always been in control of the timing. Now, time was my enemy. The diagnosis was a gut punch: pancreatic cancer. Aggressive. Stage 3. Sterling, who had always seemed indestructible, withered in that sterile chair. He immediately went into his familiar mode: surrender. "I can't put you through this, Elara. This is too much trouble. It's my time." I shut that melodrama down fast. "No dice, Sterling. We are fighting this. I'm in command now." Dr. Ellis gave us the number. The full aggressive treatment, the one that offered the best chance, was estimated at $380,000. Our fancy insurance only covered 55%. The gap, the terrifying cost of his life, was over $170,000 cash, plus another $100,000 needed for contingency funds and specialized home care. I went home and did the accounting. My stake in Vance & Stone was worth $450,000. Our colonial home was worth $250,000. To save Sterling, I was preparing to liquidate $700,000 of marital assets, simply to cover a $270,000 medical bill and create a necessary financial shield. My financial motto was always over-prepare. I didn't tell Sterling. He was too deep in self-pity. I called my partners. Martha and Charles were sharks in nice clothes. When I explained the immediate need to sell my equity, their eyes didn't show concern, they showed dollar signs. Elara, a fire sale like this, a sudden 45% equity dump. It's a massive market destabilizer, Charles, the lead lawyer said, not looking at me. The firm must buy you out immediately, but the valuation has to reflect the distressed nature of the sale. Martha, my supposed best friend for 30 years, now spoke with the cold logic of an opportunist. We understand the need, Elara, but the firm cannot absorb the full market cost. We can offer an expedited buyback. It's a discount, Elara, but we cut the check in 72 hours. They offered me $330,000 for my $450,000 stake. They were penalizing my husband's cancer to the tune of $120,000. They were stealing my legacy professionally and legally. I wanted to tell them they were off the cob, corny and rotten to the core, but I couldn't fight. Sterling was dying. I chose life. I signed the documents accepting the $120,000 theft to buy him the time he needed. I had to surrender control. It was during this cleanup that Sarah Morrison appeared. She wasn't a firm employee. She was a sharp, aggressive paralegal hired by Charles to handle the swift transfer. She was early 30s, focused, and she saw not a medical crisis but a chance to make money off a bad situation. She started talking to Sterling, not about medicine, but about solvency. While I was talking about white blood cells, Sarah was talking about high-leverage commodities and shadow capital. I was too exhausted, too steeped in the duty of care, to notice the flirtation was professional before it was personal. She was speaking his language, the language of money, while I was speaking the language of self-sacrifice. I sold the colonial home. I moved us into a dull, anonymous apartment miles from the coast. The proceeds from the house, about $230,000 liquid cash, were meant to be our safety net. I kept only the essentials, the pieces of furniture that weren't worth selling but were heavy with memory. For 8 months, I was the one who kept Sterling alive. I drove, I managed, I commanded his medical strategy. Meanwhile, Sterling and Sarah were plotting their clean slate. Sarah convinced Sterling to use the liquid cash buffer from the house sale, the $230,000 buy had set aside for our recovery, to make a series of unmissable high-risk commodity trades. Sterling, desperate to regain his financial power, poured the money in, convinced he could replace the $120,000 Martha and Charles stole and create a new future for himself. The crash was immediate and catastrophic. Sterling lost over $150,000 of our recovery buffer on bad trades directed by Sarah. He kept this financial hemorrhage a total secret from me. He used my devotion as a shield, knowing that I would ask no questions about money while his life hung in the balance. He became energized by the necessity of escaping this new, terrible debt. Then came November. Remission. Sterling was vibrant. I felt the profound physical relief of a war won. I thought we were back on the road to building a new life. I was naive because I failed to recognize that in Sterling's new financial model, I was the primary liability. He had a secret 50,000 ho, and the only way to cover it and escape my emotional scrutiny was to divorce me and transfer the remaining liquid assets to himself, using Sarah as his legal defense. The confrontation was on a cold Wednesday evening in December. I was making his favorite celebratory meal. He appeared in the kitchen, not hesitant or sad, but focused on the final transaction. Elara, we need to talk. I'd executed my final strategic move. What does that mean, Sterling? He sat, immaculate, in the modest dining chair. I've filed for divorce. I need to be unburdened, free of emotional debt and unnecessary overhead. I need a fresh balance sheet. I dropped the serving spoon. I didn't care about the sound. Unburdened? I liquidated $700,000 of our assets to buy you life. And you call that overhead? That was an enormous emotional investment, Elara, not a financial obligation. I never asked you to make such impulsive decisions. Your judgment was compromised. I merely facilitated a clean exit for myself from the chaos you created. His eyes were cold as Christmas. He was erasing my sacrifice by branding it as poor strategic planning. And this fresh balance sheet includes Sarah Morrison, the one who helped you lose $150,000 of our savings on high-risk, off-the-books trades? I shot back, the realization striking me with terrifying clarity. Sterling didn't flinch. Sarah is my future. She understands that risk equals reward. You understood the language of martyrdom. I'm moving her into this pad after the new year. The lease is in my name, funded by the final liquid asset transfer. I need you to vacate the premises by the end of the month. The cruelty was structurally total. He had used my love to fund his betrayal and was now leaving me with zero resources. Where am I supposed to go? You stripped every asset I owned. That, my dear Elara, Sterling concluded, standing, a signal that the meeting was adjourned, is a logistical challenge you failed to factor into your financial model. I suggest you consult with a social worker. I'm done with the rub. I called our son Garrett, certain he would be horrified. He was a good kid, raised right. I laid out the financial facts, the $120,000 firm penalty, the $150,000 trade loss, Sarah's involvement. Garrett's response was a real head-scratcher. Mom, I think you need to look at this objectively. Dad has a right to optimize his life after a near-death experience. Your move to liquidate the entire firm was financially irresponsible. It created instability. Dad needed a partner who could provide a clean slate and strategic clarity. Sarah provides that. Garrett, I saved his life. He's in debt. He is facing a $150,000 hole. And that was your choice, Mom. Dad explained that your emotional state clouded your judgment. He needs stability. Don't sabotage his future with emotional leverage. My own son used my language, the language of finance, to condemn me. He didn't see betrayal. He saw a poorly executed exit strategy. He had chosen the cold logic of money over the fierce warmth of loyalty. I hung up the phone, realizing I was utterly alone. The final insult came from Vance and Stone. Charles and Martha called me to a meeting at a cheap diner, refusing to let me back near the office. Elara, the reputational risk is murder, Martha said, using the slang of my youth, devoid of warmth. Sterling's affair with Sarah, the public nature of the divorce, it destabilizes the firm. We need you to surrender all remaining claims to client contacts and intellectual property. We'll cut you a final check for $8,000 for your residual shares. A final, clean exit. I signed. I had no fight left. A six-figure legacy was wiped out for a measly $8,000. By February 1st, I was out of the apartment. I was 65 years old. I had lost my husband, my son's respect, my home, my legacy, and my savings. My bank account held a pathetic 45.00. The only place left was the city shelter in the old industrial district, miles from my coastal haven. I stood on the desolate street corner that night, clutching a small, cheap suitcase. The shelter intake worker, a kind woman named Maria, gave me the rules. Lying in the narrow cot, listening to the lonely sounds of the city, I realized I had hit the absolute final bedrock. Discarded, a high-value asset suddenly worth less than nothing. Outside, the first warnings of an immense nor'easter began to howl. It was a storm that promised to be historic, a physical manifestation of the fury I felt. The world was telling me I was done. I had no idea that the total destruction of my old life was about to become the accidental catalyst for an unimaginable future. The shelter wasn't a pad, it was a cage. A necessary but unforgiving cage. That first week was a sensory assault. I was Elara Vance, the woman who negotiated multi-million-dollar deals in mahogany boardrooms. Now, I was reduced to a number on a narrow cot in a room that smelled perpetually of institutional soap and stale despair. I had to learn the rules fast, or risk losing the little dignity I had left. The sound was the worst part. 30 women trying to sleep in one room, the constant low current of breathing, coughing, and the occasional soft broken crying in the dark. I learned which cough meant tuberculosis and which meant cold. I learned which corner of the communal bathroom had the best light for checking my face, desperate to erase the exhaustion that seemed to age me a year every night. I refused to let myself look like a square, someone who had simply given up. My business brain, the one Sterling paid top dollar for, had to change jobs right away. It shifted from portfolio management to survival management. Objective 1, conserve capital. My remaining 45.U0 was a life raft. I divided it into a meticulous daily budget, $150 for transit if absolutely necessary, 2.ons for a packet of instant coffee and sugar, the only fuel I could afford that wasn't the weak, watery, institutional kind. The rest was strictly locked away. Objective 2, maintain professional decorum. I needed a job, and fast. I used the library downtown, hoarding my time on the public computers. At 65, with a massive employment gap and a public financial collapse, my resume was a joke. Every interview ended the same way, the polite, strained smile, the handshake that didn't quite connect, and the phrase, "We'll be in touch." They saw a liability, a high-maintenance disaster waiting to happen. They didn't see the woman who once saved a Fortune 500 company from regulatory catastrophe. I realized the rub-rich people have a special wall around them that keeps them safe. My collapse was public knowledge in Coastal Haven's elite circles. Sterling and Sarah were using the narrative of my emotional incompetence to justify their quick exit. By becoming homeless, I had confirmed their story. I was exiled. It was a gray Tuesday, 3 weeks after I arrived. I was trudging back to the shelter from another fruitless interview. a temp position that paid minimum wage and required me to walk 5 miles each way. I was using my 150 transit fund, which felt like a huge mistake. I was crossing the street near the city's main park when I saw the car, a sleek imported sedan. Parked at the curb, its driver talking on a headset, was Marcus Thorne. Not Julian Thorne, the billionaire, but Marcus, a former junior associate from Vance and Stone. He was 28 now, probably earning a huge salary, a product of the legacy I built. Marcus wasn't just sitting there, he was wearing a bright blue volunteer vest and was delivering boxes of premium coffee and sandwiches to a small private charity operating on the corner. A little bit of virtue signaling before he went back to his cool pad downtown. I froze. He was maybe 50 feet away. We had worked together for 4 years. I had mentored him, taught him the finer points of strategic planning. I had even co-signed his first apartment lease. I instinctively pulled my scarf higher, trying to sink into the worn collar of my coat. But the movement was unnecessary. Marcus looked right through me. His eyes swept over the line of people waiting outside the charity door, resting for a moment on my face, gaunt and tired from lack of proper sleep. He didn't blink. He didn't flinch. There was a flicker, a second of uncertainty, a possible recognition, but then the shutter closed. He returned to his phone call, his face a mask of carefully constructed indifference. He saw a homeless woman, and he registered exactly that, not Elara Vance. That small, calculated act of professional omission hit harder than Sterling's divorce papers. He was showing me the truth. You are dead to us. I felt a surge of pure, cold contempt. I didn't want his charity, his pitiful sandwiches, or his forced recognition. I wanted the power to make him understand the cost of that silence. I turned and walked toward the shelter, the street feeling colder than before. That night, the shelter was tense. The nor'easter warnings were dire historic weather event, the news reports called it. The staff were moving bunks away from the drafty windows and issuing extra blankets, thin as tissue paper. I tried to sleep, but my body was on high alert. Seeing Marcus, being thrown out, all that stress hit me like a ton of bricks. My body was on fire. I was a strategist, and I had forgotten the most basic rule of my own survival. My hand went to my chest, and a bolt of ice shot through my stomach. My little cloth purse, my survival kit, was empty. I had left my specialized heart medication, the one I took every evening with food, back in my small locker upstairs. I needed to take the pill immediately, or I risked serious complications. The shelter dinner wouldn't be served until 6:30 p.m., still 2 hours away. I couldn't wait. My strategic mind, the true core of Elara Vance, demanded immediate action. The calculation I had, the remainder of my cash, 40/30 after the transit failure. I needed food to safely cushion the medication, a protein bar, something dense, and I needed to get back before the storm hit in earnest. The nearest 24-hour convenience store, the only place open, was 4 blocks away. The risk was massive, but the alternative, a hospital trip or a stroke, was unrecoverable. I had to go. I put on my thin jacket. The wind was already screaming outside, a banshee wail that promised violence. I grabbed my small, flat emergency wallet, the one I had sewn into the lining of my coat years ago, holding my ultimate final safety net. Just in case. Inside the hidden lining was the 20 I had sworn I would never, ever touch. It was the absolute last, final reserve. The money for the bus ticket out of state. The final dignity piece. Not yet, I told myself. The 20 is for absolute destitution. The 43.50 must suffice. I pulled my hood up, ignored the concerned glance of the shelter attendant, and plunged into the growing tempest. The storm was not just rain, it was a physical force. It wasn't cool, it was terrifying. The wind slammed into me, knocking the air out of my lungs. Dark clouds turned the sky the color of old bruises, and the rain came down in sheets, instantly soaking my coat. Within 1 block, my clothes were plastered to my skin. The cold penetrated my bones, the kind of deep, aching cold that precedes hypothermia. I reached the convenience store, a brightly lit beacon in the gathering gloom. It was almost empty, just the elderly clerk and a maintenance worker buying supplies. I stumbled inside, dripping water onto the linoleum floor, every breath painful. I grabbed a dense protein bar and a small carton of milk. Total cost $5.85. I paid, leaving myself with $37.65. I swallowed the pill quickly, chewing the protein bar for insulation. The relief was immediate, but the physical terror remained. I had to get back. The clerk looked at me with open pity. "Lady, you shouldn't be out in this. It's cruising for a bruising out there. Stay put." I knew he was right, but I couldn't stay. The shelter would lock down and I would be stuck. I had to go. I stepped back outside, and the storm intensified. The wind screamed louder, a deafening white noise. Tree limbs cracked. Loose debris rattled down the street. It was a weather system designed to humble humanity, a violent display of chaos. One, the former master of strategic control, could not predict, negotiate, or stop. I ducked into the doorway of a closed restaurant, trying to calculate the next move. Wait it out or risk the 4 blocks. That's when I heard it, a small, ragged sound that somehow cut through the roaring wind, a human sound, crying, a child's desperate, broken cry. I peered into the alleyway next to the restaurant. It was crammed with industrial bins and refuse, a dark, hidden cavity. Huddled behind a massive dumpster was a small figure. A girl, no older than 7, soaked and shivering. I didn't think, I moved. The sheer injustice of a child being out in this storm overrode my survival instinct. "Honey, are you all right?" I shouted, my voice barely audible. She looked up at me with huge, terrified eyes. She was tiny, her dark hair plastered to her face. Her clothes, though torn and muddy, were high-quality, custom-made rain gear, the kind that cost a fortune. This was not a child of the shelter system. This was a child of wealth. "I'm lost," she whispered, her teeth chattering so hard I could barely hear her. "I can't find my daddy's security team. I've been hiding." "Oh, sweetheart." I knelt, ignoring the icy water that immediately soaked my pants. "How long have you been here?" Since the bad men stopped the car." "I don't know. Maybe yesterday." My blood went cold. "Bad men?" "They said they knew Daddy. They said I had to come with them, but they were mean, so I ran." This wasn't a runaway. This was a high-stakes trauma. I had stumbled into a situation far more dangerous than hypothermia. "What's your name, honey?" "Clara," she managed, tears streaming. "Clara Alyssa." I gently pulled off my scarf, inadequate as it was, and wrapped it around her small neck. "I'm Elara, Clara. We need to get you warm and dry right now." I looked around. The restaurant was sealed tight. The shelter was a dangerous, distant 6 blocks away. I needed a dry, safe, neutral zone. I remembered the convenience store I had just left. It wasn't ideal, but it was light and warm. "Can you walk?" I asked. She nodded, her small body shaking uncontrollably. I stripped off my thin jacket, the one barrier I had against the storm, and wrapped it around her, layering it over her expensive soaked gear. The cold hit me with the force of a hammer. I was now exposed, operating entirely on adrenaline. "Hold on to me, Clara. Don't let go." The walk back felt like walking through cement. The wind fought us every step. We burst through the convenience store doors, both of us soaking and shaking. The clerk, Manny, looked up, horrified. "Jesus, lady, what's the rub? You can't be out there with a kid." "Caught in the storm," I gasped, leaning against the doorframe. "She's lost. She needs dry clothes and food." Clara stayed pressed against my side, her small body vibrating with cold and fear. The store was blissfully warm. My strategic mind went into immediate triage. She needed dry clothing. I looked at the small, expensive shirt she wore. It needed to come off. I found the cheapest t-shirt, children's socks, and a small sealed blanket in the camping section. I calculated the cost: cartoon t-shirt $4.99, socks $2.99, small emergency thermal blanket $6.50, a bottle of water and a cracker pack $3.50, total $17.98, my remaining cash $30.1765. I could afford it, but it would shatter my remaining reserve, leaving me with less than $20. The thought made my palms sweat, but then I looked at Clara, blue lips, chattering teeth. She was slipping towards shock. The dry clothes were essential, non-negotiable medical care. I reached into the lining of my coat, pulled out the ultimate insurance policy, the crisp, hidden 20 bill, the money I had sworn I would never, ever touch. It was the absolute last, final reserve. I was choosing moral capital over financial survival. I marched to the counter with the items and the $20 bill. "I need these, and please call the police, but don't let her hear you." Manny rang it up. $17.98. "Wait, lady, you're using a 20 for this? You got any singles?" "No, I need this done now." I pushed the 20 across the counter. Manny hesitated. He saw the intensity in my eyes. He saw the cold, terrified child. He took the 20. He handed me the change, $2 too. My entire reserve, the last tangible link to my old life, had been reduced to pocket change. My final financial status, $2 too. In the small, cramped restroom, I helped Clara change into the dry shirt and socks. I dried her hair with paper towels, warming her small body with the thermal blanket. "Better?" I asked. She leaned against me, her trembling slowing. She looked up with eyes that held pure gratitude. "Yes, Thank you, Elara. Daddy always said a designated protector is someone who gives up their last defense for you. I froze. Designated protector. That was high-level security language. I was not just dealing with a lost child, I was dealing with a high-value asset, and I had just burned my entire financial shield to protect her. The stakes had been raised to catastrophic levels. The storm was still raging. I managed to get the police alert out to Manny, whispering the name she had given me, Julian Thorne. Julian Thorne! The name meant nothing to me, but the fear in Clara's voice was real. We can't go to the police yet, Clara pleaded, clutching my arm. The men said if I involved the authorities, they'd sabotage Daddy's global operations. I believed her. The trauma was too fresh. My strategic mind, now fully engaged in its new assignment, had to find a secure, untraceable holding zone. The shelter was out. The streets were death. I looked at Manny. He was watching us, his face creased with concern. Manny, I said, pulling him aside. This girl is a high-profile target. Kidnappers. If the police come here, they might trace the call. She needs a place to hide for the night. Do you know anywhere safe, dry, and off the grid? Manny looked outside at the terrifying storm. He sighed, rubbing his tired face. What a mess. There's an old community center down the road. Closed for renovations, but the back door is usually left unlocked for the painters. Nobody goes near it. It's a complete square location, no foot traffic. It was the best offer I had. The old community center would provide a roof, walls, and isolation. It was a strategic advantage. We left the store as the storm began to abate slightly. Manny handed us a small paper bag of free granola bars and a thermos of hot water. Good luck, Elara. This kid's got a protector. That's cool. The walk to the community center was treacherous, but the building was sound. We found the back door, slipped inside, and found refuge in a cold, dusty meeting room. As she drifted into a troubled sleep, I sat watching the window, and that's when I saw it. Parked 2 blocks down, barely visible through the clearing rain, was a large, tinted black sedan, not moving, just sitting there. It was the kind of car that didn't belong in this run-down industrial neighborhood. It was the kind of car that said high-end security or professional threat. My heart started pounding again, not from the medication this time, but from pure cold fear. They hadn't gone. They were watching. They had traced us to this area. My ultimate sacrifice, the use of my last $20, had exposed me to a world of professional danger. The community center wasn't cool, but it was dry. And quiet. Too quiet. I sat in the cold, dusty meeting room, wrapped tight in the emergency thermal blanket Manny had given us. Clara was asleep on a pile of bundled jackets, her breathing finally steady. My focus wasn't on her, it was on the window, on the dark street outside. The black sedan was still there. Parked 2 blocks down, a big, heavy ghost barely visible through the clearing drizzle. It wasn't just a car, it was a predator waiting for its prey. My mind, the strategic engine that built Vance & Stone Financial Group, started analyzing the threat. This wasn't a bunch of neighborhood thugs. The car was stationary, no lights, no movement, just waiting. Patience. The tint on the windows was military grade, designed to obscure everything, professionalism. When the police were called earlier, the car didn't budge. If they were kidnappers, they should have vanished. Confidence, the rub. This wasn't the police, and it probably wasn't the first group of kidnappers who had scared Clara. This looked like high-end private security. But were they good guys or bad guys? If they were the good guys, Julian Thorne's security team, why hadn't they approached the minute they found Clara? Because they didn't know who I was. They saw an older woman in a worn coat dragging a high-value asset into a dark, abandoned building during a massive storm. To them, I was either a homeless Samaritan or the bagman, the low-level operative who took the girl off the street for the main players. They were waiting for me to make a move, to call someone, to reveal my hand. I was trapped. I had 2 choices, and both were big deals. I looked at Clara. I had spent my last dollar, risked my life, and sacrificed my final defense, the 20 bill, for this child. I wasn't going to let some square security team erase my integrity. I needed to control the narrative. I needed to control the exit. I sat in the dusty silence and forced myself to think like Sterling, my old treacherous partner, but with my own moral code. I needed information, and I needed it from Clara, simple and straight up. I woke her gently. Clara, sweetheart, you are solid as a rock. You survived the storm, but we have a problem. There's a car outside. We need to know who we're dealing with. Clara rubbed her eyes, still groggy, but the fear was still there. That's why I ran from the men in the other car. Daddy has a lot of rules. Tell me about your daddy, Clara. Julian Thorne. What does he do that makes people want to hurt you? Clara explained, not in business jargon but in simple facts. Her father was the head of Thorne Global Technologies. They didn't just build computers, they built the secure systems that protected banks, governments, and military communications. Daddy calls it the firewall, Clara said simply. If the bad guys could break the firewall, they could steal everything. The men who took me, they wanted Daddy to give them the access codes. They wanted him to break his own rules. This wasn't about money. It was about global integrity. Sterling betrayed my trust for $150,000. Julian Thorne was being blackmailed over national security. My small act of kindness had escalated into a situation far beyond my experience at Vance and Stone. And the men outside, the ones waiting in the black car, I asked? Daddy's security is super secret, she whispered. They look like regular people, but they watch everything. If they see me with someone they don't know, they wait. They have to be sure you're not the plant, a mole. They were treating me, Elara Vance, former strategic director, like a low-level enemy operative. The indignity of it flared, but I immediately converted it into motivation. I would prove to them that I was no mole. I was a designated protector, and I had a plan. I looked at my watch. It was 6:30 a.m. The worst of the storm was over. The city would begin to wake up. My strategic goal forced Julian Thorne's security team to make contact in a non-negotiable public space where their high-end professionalism would prevent them from harming me. I needed the cameras, the witnesses, the official status, the asset. I had exactly 202 left. My 20 was gone. I had to use my wits, not my wallet. Clara, I said, my voice firm. We are going to move. We are going to the central bank building downtown. Why there, Elara? It's far, because it's where the most important money in this city is kept, and it's where the security cameras are best. It's the most secure location I can get us to. And it's where my old bank, the one that holds the key to my past, is located. We need to go public, and we need to look like we belong. I took the thermal blanket and wrapped it tightly around Clara, tucking my coat around her shoulders. I walked into the dusty hall, found 2 abandoned paint cans, and cleaned them as best I could with the last bit of hot water from Manny's thermos. We would look like 2 workers on a morning break. It was a bluff, but it was the only one I had. At 7:30 a.m., we slipped out the back door of the community center. The street was slick, but the wind had dropped to a stiff, cold breeze. The black sedan was still waiting. I gripped Clara's hand. We are walking straight and steady, Clara. No running. We look like we have a plan. The first few blocks were terrifying. I kept checking the side street. I could feel the intense, focused surveillance. As we reached the intersection of 5th and Commerce, the sedan moved, slowly, deliberately, pulling alongside the curb, keeping pace with us. I could see the front passenger window roll down a half inch. A voice, calm and deep, spoke from inside the car. "Ma'am, stop immediately. We need to confirm the status of the child." I didn't stop. I looked straight ahead. I am the designated protector. I am delivering this asset to a safe location. If you wish to intercept, you will do so in a public square. You will not disrupt the integrity of this transfer. I was speaking in pure corporate, speak the language of high-stakes leverage, the only language I had left. I threw their own professionalism back in their faces. The voice from the car was surprised. "Ma'am, we advise you to comply. You are impeding a federal security operation. I am facilitating a safe transfer. Follow us to the central bank building. That is my point of contact. If you approach me now, I will scream, and I will force you to use physical force in full view of the morning commuters. I will make this messy. You can't afford messy." I had called their bluff. The car hesitated, then reluctantly pulled behind us, maintaining distance. I knew they were calling headquarters, asking, "What is the rub with this lady? She's talking like a CEO?" We reached the bank building, a towering monument to granite and capital, precisely at 8:30 a.m. Commuters were already flooding the sidewalks. We stood right under the massive gold seal of the bank, the most public, camera-heavy spot in the city. I looked down at Clara. "We are safe now, sweetheart. We hold this position." 10 minutes later, the first siren wailed in the distance, not a police siren, but a deep, throaty security alarm. Then I heard the sound of approaching wealth, the controlled, heavy rumble of high-end armored vehicles. From 3 different directions they appeared. 17 massive black security vehicles, moving with military synchronization, sealing off the entire intersection. It wasn't a fleet, it was a wall of steel and tinted glass, silent and overwhelming. It was the most dramatic entrance I had ever witnessed, far surpassing any arrival Sterling had ever orchestrated. The first car, a Rolls-Royce Cullinan, the most expensive armored vehicle on the market, pulled directly up to the curb. The door opened, and Julian Thorne stepped out. He was taller than I expected, maybe 6'3", silver-haired, impeccably dressed, with the kind of powerful, intense focus that makes you feel like you owe him money just for the air you breathe. But when his eyes, blue and sharp, landed on Clara, the CEO vanished. "Clara! Daddy!" Clara broke away from me and ran. Julian Thorne caught her, lifting her high into the air, holding her to his chest. His shoulders shook, not with fear, but with raw physical relief. The sight of this man, the head of a global empire utterly undone by love for his daughter, was a big deal. He held her for a long minute, then gently set her down. His gaze turned to me. He walked toward me slowly, his security team, the men from the sedan, fanning out behind him. I stood my ground, my posture straight despite my soaking clothes and my total exhaustion. "You're the woman who protected my daughter," he stated, his voice deep and calm, the voice of pure authority. "I am Elara Vance. I found her in the storm. She was cold and terrified. I ensured her survival and transfer to a public, secure location. I used my financial reporting voice. You risked your life for a stranger. My team reported your dialogue, your demand for a public transfer. You ran a better strategic operation than the FBI. Julian Thorne didn't ask if I was a suspect. He didn't ask where I came from. He asked the only question that mattered: why? You were in that storm. You look under-resourced. Why did you risk everything for her?" I didn't talk about my heart medication or the 20 bill. I looked at him straight up. I lost everything I built because the men in my life, my husband, my son, my partners, chose immediate, cheap gain over long-term integrity. They erased my worth because it was financially convenient. When I found Clara, I realized the only thing I had left that they couldn't steal was my moral capital. I chose to invest my last resource, my life, into her survival. It was a clean transaction. Julian Thorne studied me for a long, quiet moment. He saw the cold, the exhaustion, but he also saw the unbent spine of a woman who had fought a war and won. "Elara Vance," he said, the name sounding profound on his lips. "My team ran a preliminary profile the moment you spoke. They saw the public record of your divorce, the firm liquidation. They saw your recent address listed as the Maple Street shelter." My cheeks burned with shame, but I held his gaze. "That's straight up. It's temporary. I was strategically regrouping." "No, Elara, you weren't regrouping. You were abandoned. But your action here today confirms everything I need to know. You possess a level of integrity and strategic clarity that is solid as a rock. You valued my daughter's life more than your own final survival fund. I need people like you in my world." He turned to his lead security commander. "I want Mrs. Vance to be taken back to the compound immediately. She is to be treated as a designated protector and a high-value asset. I want a full, high-level background deep dive on her entire professional career, but with one condition: I want a full strategic defense plan written for her. I want her life's losses cataloged and reversed." Then he looked back at me, his eyes holding a promise I hadn't seen in 4 years. "You have bought your way into my family, Elara. You spent your last $20 to save my daughter. Now, I am going to show you the long-term, non-negotiable dividend of integrity. I don't need charity, Mr. Thorne." "This isn't charity," he said, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "It's a hiring. And I am willing to pay a very high price for a strategist with your moral compass. Now, let's get you warm. The cat's out of the bag now, and the world is about to change." I felt the shock recede, replaced by a wave of relief and the unfamiliar, intoxicating sensation of being valued again. The game was on. The ride in Julian Thorne's armored Rolls-Royce was a complete change of pace. Just hours earlier, I had been standing in the rain, counting my last 2.0 in pocket change. Now, I was sinking into leather seats that felt softer than any mattress I'd ever owned. Clara was asleep instantly, curled up against me, safe and warm under the expensive thermal blanket. I was in shock. It wasn't just the speed of the car or the silence of the ride. It was the psychological shift. In one single hour, I went from being trash on the street to being worth more than gold. Julian Thorne sat across from me, watching me with those sharp blue eyes. He didn't waste time on saying pretty things or feeling sorry for me. He spoke strictly in the language of strategy and business. "Elara," he said, his voice calm, "we are going to my secure compound, Thorne's Watch. It's 2 hours from the city. You will have a safe, private space, food, and medical clearance. But I need you to understand something straight up. I don't operate on sentiment. I operate on validated competence. I understand, Mr. Thorne. I am a strategic asset, not a charity case. Exactly. You proved your worth was non-negotiable by making the ultimate sacrifice. But I don't hire based on one action. I need to know the whole picture, where your risks are. He leaned forward, his focus absolute. I need you to prepare a complete strategic defense plan for your own life. I want every decision Sterling made after his remission cataloged. I want the exact paper trail of the $150,000 loss he sustained on Sarah Morrison's advice. I want to know the financial reasons he abandoned you, not the emotional ones. You are a strategic mind. Use it. For the first time in years, I felt a genuine thrill. He wasn't asking me to scrub floors. He was giving me a massive new assignment, backing it with unlimited resources, and asking me to analyze my own ruin. I was being hired to do what I did best, expose a financial fault line. Consider it done, Mr. Thorne. A fortress of glass and steel carved into the granite cliffs, overlooking the same Atlantic I used to see from my colonial home, but 100 times grander. It was a place where money bought total security and complete separation from the messy world. I was shown to a private suite larger than the entire apartment Sterling had seized. The bathroom was all marble and glass. The clothes laid out for me, soft cashmere and tailored trousers, were a big deal. They were not charity, they were a uniform. For the next 24 hours, I didn't sleep. I was in a war room, not a bedroom. Julian's top legal and forensic team, led by Commander Richards, the man from the bank, came to me. They didn't patronize me, they asked for my expertise. I sat with the analysts, explaining the inner workings of Vance and Stone, detailing the predatory nature of the buyout. I walked them through the timeline, the sacrifice, the $700,000 liquidation in March, the theft, the $100,000 penalty taken by Martha and Charles in April, the secret Sterling's high-risk trading loss of $150,000 between June and October, orchestrated by Sarah Morrison. The analysts, armed with Julian's complete access to financial tracking systems, confirmed every detail. They had found the shadow accounts Sterling and Sarah used, the offshore accounts designed to hide the losses. Mrs. Vance, the lead analyst, a young woman named Gwen, said, her voice respectful, "Sterling Vance didn't leave you because you were emotional. He left you because he had fully funded his life-saving treatment, and he desperately needed to liquidate the remaining assets to cover $150,000 whole before you discovered it. He planned to blame the loss on your incompetence. My integrity was not only affirmed, but Sterling's betrayal was quantified. It wasn't just infidelity, it was a clear-cut case of financial fraud and asset misallocation, committed while I was solely focused on saving his life. This was the proof I needed to fight back, not with tears, but with legal steel." That evening, I met Julian Thorne for dinner. We sat at a massive glass table overlooking the dark, swirling ocean. The entire compound was quiet. "The results are in, Elara," Julian said, sipping his water. "Your strategic defense plan is sound. Sterling Vance's narrative that you were the unstable party is a total lie. He is facing enormous, undisclosed personal debt and potential civil litigation regarding the liquidation of your shared business assets." He pushed a folder across the table. "I want to offer you the position of Director of Strategic Family Assets and Legacy. The salary is $250,000 per year, with a $75,000 immediate signing bonus. Your primary role will be Clara's emotional and strategic development, but I will also rely on your financial acumen." "I accept, Mr. Thorne, but my first action item must be a reckoning. I need to publicly unmask Sterling and Garrett. I need to prove, not just to myself but to Coastal Haven, that my integrity is intact. I need to dissolve the false narrative that destroyed my worth." Julian smiled, a sharp, genuine flash of power. "That is precisely what I planned. We will fire the first shot tomorrow morning. We will use what they value most, reputation and greed." Julian and I orchestrated a simple plan. We would leak a carefully crafted, partial story to the Coastal Haven Gazette financial genius. Elara Vance, thought missing after her devastating divorce, has been secretly hired by Julian Thorne's Global Technologies in a senior strategic role. The rumor would be simple: Elara didn't fail, she was headhunted. "Sterling and Garrett won't believe you were simply hired," Julian explained. "They will believe you are rich. They will believe you have access to my vast fortune and, more importantly, that you have liquid assets they can claim. They will come running, expecting an inheritance or a payout. They won't be able to resist the money," I said, a cold certainty settling in my stomach. "Especially Sterling, who is sinking in debt. He will bring Garrett as his human shield." The news hit the wire the next morning. My name, Elara Vance, was suddenly plastered across the local paper, linked directly to the most powerful man in Maine. The reaction was immediate and immense. My phone, which had been silent for 4 months, began to buzz with calls from old colleagues, distant cousins, and friends who suddenly remembered my existence. They wanted to know if I was solid as a rock, if I was making big bucks. Sterling and Garrett took the bait instantly. Sterling was desperate. He had nowhere to turn, his creditors were circling, and Sarah Morrison had fled to Florida, leaving him with the $150,000 loss. Commander Richards intercepted their calls and emails. They were frantic. They believed I had stumbled into a gold mine. They believed they could use their family bond to convince me to bail out Sterling's debt. Julian and I decided the confrontation would take place at Thorne's watch, at the most guarded gate, where they could not escape scrutiny. I was dressed in my new uniform, a sharp sapphire blue suit, the colors of power and granite. I felt the armor of my competence settle back into place. "Remember, Elara," Julian advised, his eyes hard. "Sterling's entire strategy is built on emotional manipulation and the lie of your compromised judgment. We must respond with quantifiable facts and superior legal standing, no emotion, just balance sheets." They arrived at 3,000 p.m. Sterling in a cheap, rumpled suit, looking tired and anxious. Garrett, our son, looking deeply uncomfortable, clearly dragged along to provide familial leverage. The guards made them sit in the gatehouse for 30 minutes. It was a clear message: you're not important anymore. When I finally walked out to meet them, I wasn't alone. Julian Thorne stood beside me, tall and utterly imposing, flanked by Commander Richards and a team of analysts holding confidential folders. Sterling rushed forward, a practiced look of sorrow plastered on his face. "Elara, thank God. I'd been so worried. The cancer medication, it affected my judgment. We need to come home, sweetheart. We need to start over." He reached for my hand, but Julian smoothly stepped forward, blocking him. "Mr. Vance, you are trespassing on private, federally secured property. Address your questions to Mrs. Vance's legal counsel or myself." Sterling deflated, shocked by the immediate, impenetrable firewall. He then focused on me, lowering his voice to the manipulative tone he used in the bedroom. "Elara, I was off the cob. I was a wreck. But you look wonderful. We can talk about this new job, this windfall. I just need a small, temporary loan to clear up some residual debt, just a few accounts." Sarah ran up. I didn't let him finish. I spoke in the voice I used for client terminations, clear, sharp, and final. "You are here for one reason. You need $150,000 to cover the high-risk commodities loss that Sarah Morrison helped you execute between June and October of last year. You left me because you were bankrupting yourself and needed to escape the financial consequences." Sterling's face went white. He looked at Julian in panic. "She's hallucinating. The divorce made her unstable. This is the emotional breakdown I warned Garrett about. That was the line, the claim of my instability." Julian Thorne stepped forward holding a folder. He didn't shout, he just spoke with the terrifying quietness of authority. "Mr. Vance, I advise you to stop. We have forensic proof. My team has confirmed the paper trail for every dollar transferred out of the medical trust and into the off-market commodities accounts. The $150,000 loss is proven, and we have evidence of financial fraud and asset misallocation against Mrs. Vance." Julian turned to Garrett, who was pale and sweating. "Garrett, your mother did not have a breakdown. She saved your father's life at the cost of her own career. Your father then leveraged her sacrifice to cover his gambling loss. When she refused to fund his debt, he abandoned her on the streets, expecting her to fail." Garrett looked at his father with utter horror. "Dad, is this straight up? The $150,000? Sterling was trapped, his face a mask of shame and fury. "Elara, you get bent. You are insane. You're choosing this gangster over your own blood." "I am choosing my own worth, Sterling," I replied, my voice steady. "You called my choice to save your life emotional overhead. I am now proving that my choice was a strategic investment in my own future. You are a strategic failure, Sterling, and a moral one." Julian sealed the trap. "You have two choices, Mr. Vance. You can leave now and never contact Mrs. Vance again, or my legal team will file suit tomorrow, exposing the complete financial fraud, which will ruin your credit and destroy the remainder of your professional reputation in Coastal Haven. Choose." Sterling broke. The man who had been the face of financial success whimpered, defeated. He grabbed Garrett's arm and dragged his stunned son away, leaving his dignity scattered on the immaculate stone drive. As the car carrying my betrayers vanished, I felt a massive physical weight lift from my shoulders. It was over. Julian turned to me, his expression respectful. The first phase is complete, Elara. You performed with absolute clarity. That was a big deal. Thank you, Julian. But I still owe you an explanation. I need to know the terms of my employment. I don't want any hanky-panky. He smiled, genuinely. Elara, I'm not Sterling. I don't buy people. I invest in integrity. Your salary is set. Your bonus is ready. But your most important job is not financial. It's building the moral compass of my daughter. Clara needs you more than I need your strategic advice. He escorted me back into the warmth of the fortress. Inside, Clara was waiting, coloring quietly, safe. Elara, I'm glad you're staying, she said simply, looking up from her book. Daddy says you're the smartest lady he knows. I told him he got a dreamboat deal. I knelt beside her, pulling her close. I had lost everything, but in that moment, sitting beside a little girl who saw me as her protector and a man who saw my worth, I realized the ultimate truth. My integrity was the investment. My new life, my new family, was the dividend. And this was only the beginning of smooth sailing. The first few months at Thorne's Watch were a blur of peace and purpose. The massive, secure compound that was once intimidating became my new office. I was now the Director of Strategic Family Assets and Legacy. That title, while a big deal on paper, simply meant I was running Julian Thorne's entire personal life and Clara's emotional well-being with the same surgical focus I once applied to Vance and Stone, but with zero ethical compromises. I ran the staff like a high-performing team. I set Clara's educational and security schedule with military precision. I oversaw the finances that kept the entire fortress running. Julian wasn't paying me to be a housekeeper. He was paying me to apply my 65 years of hard-won experience and professional clarity to the things that mattered most: family and security. I still woke up some nights sweating, hearing Sterling's cold voice telling me I was financially worthless. But then I would look out the floor-to-ceiling windows of my suite at the dark Atlantic, and I would feel the solidity of the granite cliffs beneath Thorne's Watch. This security wasn't bought with a lie, it was earned with a 20 bill and a clear conscience. Clara was my constant companion. She was a dreamboat kid, smart, funny, and deeply affectionate. She called me Elara, Mom, when Julian wasn't around, a name that healed the wound Garrett had left. We had our routine morning tea in the sunroom, discussing her lessons, then an hour of quiet time where I would help her sort through her toys, which she treated like valuable assets that needed inventory. She saw the world through the lens of order, just like me. Julian was rarely home for long stretches. He flew in and out on his private jet, commanding global operations. But when he was home, he made the time count. He deferred to my judgment on everything regarding Clara. Elara, he said one night during a late meeting, pushing a folder across the table. You reorganized my entire domestic security budget. You cut spending by 15% and increased efficiency by 30%. You found a $2 million hole in my daughter's educational trust that my entire accounting team missed. You are solid as a rock. The praise was better than any multi-million-dollar deal I had ever closed at Vance and Stone. It was the simple, straight-up acknowledgement of my worth, not my price. 6 months into the job, Julian called me into his vast, quiet study, the same room where I had been tasked with exposing Sterling's fraud. Elara, we need to discuss your contract. You've proven your value far exceeds the initial compensation package. Effective immediately, your position is elevated to Executive Director of the Thorne Family Office. Your salary will be adjusted to $350,000 per year, plus full equity benefits in the family trust portfolio. It's the highest salary I pay any non-family executive. Julian, that's an enormous raise. I appreciate the professional respect, truly. It's not appreciation, Elara, it's market value. Now, for the real issue. He closed the folder, his expression becoming serious and intense. This next decision is about permanence. Clara needs you here, not just for a few years, but for her lifetime. My work puts me in harm's way every day. I have legal guardianship structured, but it's brittle. It's not family. He leaned back, his powerful posture softening. I need you to consider a legal arrangement that ensures your permanence. I want to initiate the process of adult adoption. Clara would legally adopt you as her grandmother. You would legally become Elara Thorne Vance. This secures your place in our family structure forever, regardless of my professional life, and provides you with the ultimate legal shield against any of the vultures from your past. And more importantly, Julian continued, his voice dropping slightly, I need to update my will. I want you to be named Clara's sole, non-negotiable legal guardian. Not just a companion, but her legal mother and protector should anything ever happen to me. I need to know her moral compass will be steered by you, Elara. The weight of the offer was immense. He was trusting me with his daughter's soul, her safety, and her 4 billion inheritance. He was giving me the legacy Sterling had stolen. Julian, I don't know what to say. It's the most profound act of faith I've ever witnessed. Say yes, Elara. Clara needs a grandmother, and you need a family that sees your integrity, not your tax bracket. Yes, I said, the words solid and final. Absolutely yes. The news of the adoption papers hitting the court dockets, even with Julian's efforts to keep it private, traveled fast. The coastal haven community, which had exiled me, now saw me as an untouchable titan secured by the Thorne name, the ultimate reversal of reputation. But the final, messy piece of my past was about to make its inevitable, desperate return. 3 weeks after the adoption papers were filed, Commander Richards informed me that my son, Garrett, was at the gate, asking to see me. He is alone, Elara. And he looks like a man who has lost more than just his job. He's driving a wreck of a car. What's the rub? I knew straight up what he wanted, a bailout. Sterling's exposed fraud had ruined Garrett's reputation in Boston finance. Garrett, the son who chose money over loyalty, was now paying the price. I agreed to meet him at the guarded reception house, neutral territory. I went alone. I needed this final confrontation to be clean, without Julian's armor. Garrett, 40, looked beaten. The expensive suit was gone, replaced by a cheap stained polo shirt. He had aged 10 years. "Mom," he said, his voice pleading, "I came to apologize. I know I was off the cob. I was wrong about everything. Dad, he's completely destroyed. He's lost the apartment, he's facing creditor lawsuits, and Sarah left him, took everything she could find. I finally saw the truth, Mom. He used me to validate his crime." I let him talk. He finally sounded like my son, not Sterling's junior partner. "I should have protected you, Mom," he admitted, tears welling up. "I should have seen the betrayal. I let you go to the shelter. I am so sorry." The moment of truth. My heart ached for the son I had raised, but my strategic mind, the mind that secured Clara's survival, knew the rules of the game. "I accept your apology, Garrett," I said, my voice calm but unwavering. "It is a big deal that you finally saw the truth. But your father's crime wasn't just financial. It was the crime of using my sacrifice to cover his personal debt. And you chose to believe his lie because it was easier than fighting him. Mom, I know. I'm starting over in California. I just need a small loan to get back on my feet. I need a clean slate. I need capital to rebuild my career." I looked at my son, and I saw the last vestiges of Sterling's greed in his eyes. He wasn't asking for forgiveness. He was asking for a bridge loan. "Garrett, I gave your father over $700,000 to save his life. That was my emotional capital. I gave my last 20 to Clara because she needed a blanket. That was my moral capital. Both transactions were non-negotiable investments." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a clean, crisp 20 bill. I placed it on the table between us. "I am a rich woman now, Garrett. But I am rich because I value integrity. You need to learn the true price of capital. This is my last 20 to you. Buy yourself dinner. Find a shelter. You need to build your own worth from the ground up, just like I was forced to do. You need to prove, not to me, but to yourself, that your moral compass is solid as a rock." He stared at the 20 bill, realizing the finality of my decision. It wasn't about the money. It was about the principle. He stood up, tears streaming, but this time they were tears of understanding, not manipulation. "I understand, Elara. Mom," he whispered, using the name Clara had given me. He picked up the bill, nodded, and walked out, leaving my past officially and cleanly retired. The adoption hearing was a quiet, private affair a month later. Julian and I stood before the judge, Clara fidgeting between us. I officially became Elara Vance Thorne, the legal grandmother of Clara Alyssa Thorne. The greatest moment wasn't the judge's pronouncement, it was Clara launching herself into my arms afterward. "We're a permanent team, Elara. Grandma, this is the ends bill of being alone." He handed me the final, sealed documents, the new will, the guardianship papers, the trust charter. "It's official, Elara. You are my daughter's protector, her legal guardian, and her moral anchor. You gave her the gift of life in that storm, and you gave me the gift of security I could never buy. Thank you." I looked at the documents, the legacy I had built, lost, and rebuilt with integrity. I had saved a fortune, saved a life, and saved myself. "Julian," I said, "why did you really do all this? The wealth, the power, you could have hired anyone." He looked out at the lights of the distant city, now merely a faint glow on the horizon. Because my entire life is built on systems, on firewalls, on risk analysis, you, Elara Vance, are the only person who passed the ultimate test. You invested your entire survival instinct into a stranger's child when you had nothing to gain. That is the definition of uncompromised integrity. That is the kind of loyalty that cannot be bought, only earned. I invested in your soul, Elara, and it was the best deal I ever made. I was 67 years old. I was rich, safe, and part of a family that valued me unconditionally. My story was no longer about being discarded. It was about being reclaimed. It was the story of how the very act of giving away my last defense was the moment I found my ultimate shield. The truth is, sometimes the greatest losses of our lives are just the universe clearing the ledger for the biggest win. I lost my marriage, my son's respect, and my entire professional legacy to men who valued the quick, easy dollar. I was left with nothing but a 20 bill and a broken heart. But that 20 bill, that simple act of giving everything when I had nothing, was my moral capital. It bought me a new life, a new purpose, and a permanent family. I got my dignity back, my professional worth, and the unconditional love of a little girl who calls me her grandmother. I'm Elara Vance Thorne now, and my life is smooth sailing. I want to hear from you. Have you ever risked everything for someone who didn't deserve it? Have you ever had to choose between money and what was right? What is the one thing in your life that no one, no matter how powerful, can ever steal from you? Share your story in the comments below.